introduce Andy. Andy works on the Go team at Google. And I did not ask him his fact, so I'm going to make one up right now.
Go for it.
We could just ask him.
Andy runs marathons.
I do not.
Andy has run a marathon.
Andy does not run marathons.
Half a marathon.
Andy has spelt the word marathon before.
Maybe.
Andy has run a 10K.
Sure, yes.
Okay. Andy runs 10Ks.
Sure. Okay, how's everybody doing? I'll promise I'll be short because I know that people want to socialize and sort of get on. What was that?
We're not socializing.
Oh, okay. Sorry, we need to get to this special event. Today I'm going to talk about recognizing value. I'm going to tell it in 3 parts. I'm going to talk about recognizing my own value in the Go project, and then give some examples from actually outside of the industry, and then sort of bring it all back to how we can apply the lessons that we've learned back into the ecosystem. So before, is this working? Come on. It's like the demo gods, only with the presentation gods. Okay. All right, I guess I... Okay. All right, breathing. Before I was a member of the Go team, I lived in San Francisco on an extended period working on the Gerrit code review UI. If you've sent out reviews or if you've actually reviewed code, you've noticed that there was a change in the UI, so I led the team that actually changed that. That being said, that was still a short-term assignment for me. I live in New York, and my original plan was to return to New York. And when it came time for me to plan my return, I was informed that I would not be able to keep my current role on the Gerrit team if I moved away from the Bay Area. And so I had a choice. I could stay in San Francisco on the Gerrit team, or I could move back to New York and find a new role out of the New York office. So San Francisco has its charms, but I like being close to my family, who are predominantly on the East Coast. I like our seasons. I like our version of bodegas. And so I said, okay, I'm moving back to New York. And so my manager was very supportive of this, and we marked out a plan, and we said, okay, you're going to move by this date. And so thus began the process of finding a new role within New York City. So at Google, there's this internal job board, and teams can put up job requisitions as headcount becomes available, and you apply for the position. There's no whiteboarding interview, thank God. But it's not unlike what you would experience if you were to apply to an external company. So you would have a conversation with the manager on the team. You would potentially go and meet with the team to see if you gel with them. You would want to make sure that the work that you're doing is in line with your career goals and that it's interesting to you, that you're not writing in a language that you hate. And so all these things were all while potentially competing with other people at Google, because our headcount is relatively constrained depending on the time and what the department that you're applying for. And so I had a terrible time finding a job. I thought it would take a month. It took way longer. It was not unlike, in terms of the stress that I experienced, what it would be like if I was applying for an external job, only without the whiteboarding interviews. I would go for a month with one team, and then I would either decide it was not a good fit, or they would decide it was not a good fit, or they said, oh, well, we had somebody else that came in, and it was extremely stressful. And this was all while I was trying to plan my return back to New York. And so I was coming down to the wire, and I started freaking out because I have anxiety, and that's what we do. And I had 2 weeks to figure out what I was going to do. And on the team that I was currently on the Gerrit team, they basically said, okay, well, once you move to New York, you have 2 weeks to find a new role, and then we don't know what's going to happen to you. And so I didn't want to get to that point, and I don't think they were saying we're going to fire you, but it was like you may land in a role in which you really don't like it, so you better, get your shit together. And suddenly I saw in our internal Google Plus that an opening came up on the Go team in New York City, or actually in a couple of different areas, but New York City was one of the places you could work. And I figuratively ran to my computer and emailed them, and I applied to the position, and I emailed and I said, oh, I love Go. I mean, you'd hope so, I'm talking here. I love Go, and I've contributed to the standard library, and I've forced my old startup to use it for everything. And we need to make a decision in like 2 weeks. So if you could get back to me soon, that would be really great. And so we did our internal hiring dance, and Russ and Samir is the manager of the Go team. He was very nice about it, and he was accommodating, and he understood my scenario. And they knew me from the community, so I think it helped a little bit that it was a familiar face or familiar name for them. And so we did our internal dance, and then I landed a position on the Go team in New York. And I was so happy. I was so relieved and elated, and I didn't have to worry about this huge facet of moving my entire life back across the country. And I didn't have to worry about securing my next role at this company or potentially interviewing for roles at other companies, which was also on the table. Because this is my biggest stressor, and now I can just focus on logistics, like moving my stuff and whatever. And so I came down from that, and I said, okay, I'm happy, but now it's time to think about things. And I thought about it a bit more, and primarily my value proposition at Google in terms of Andrew Bonventre is I am a front-end engineer, and that the maximum amount of expertise that I can, or maximum amount of value that I can provide a team generally is within the front-end engineering discipline. The amount of really smart people that you work with, you tend to get a little bit more specialized, especially as your seniority grows. And so that was my thing, is that I do front-end engineering. I know I've built stuff in Go, I've built backends and worked in different systems and everything else, but that was my primary value add in terms of like the most amount of leverage that you can have in terms of impact. And I was joining a team building a programming language. And these two didn't really connect. Because I didn't have any professional experience building a programming language. I did some stuff in college, but even then that was way too long ago. And so there was no professional context in which I had any experience building the type of stuff of what I view to be, the Go programming language and what I would be doing day to day. And so I flipped out. And suddenly this was all seeming like I and the Go team had made this huge, terrible mistake. And they were going to find me out, and it was going to be even worse than if I didn't find a job in the first place. And so right on cue, my mind dutifully placed the soul-crushing weight of imposter syndrome upon my shoulders, and I started wondering what my purpose was on this team. And so while I was wondering this, it was good timing, in that they had some starter projects for me. So they had me move some stuff from App Engine to GKE to deal with some features that we wanted to do. They had me standardize some deployment scripts because our apps in our infrastructure were getting a little bit large. And Steve came along and he said, oh, you do front-end stuff. We were doing this contributor day at GopherCon. So who here went to GopherCon? Who here did the contributor day? Okay, so contributor day was that Saturday, and the idea was everybody come and we'll have the Go team available, and we're going to help you make your first contribution to Go, the programming language project. And the thing that Steve had an idea for, which was a really good idea, was to have a dashboard. And so you can see on the right, there's this live updating feed, and it said, oh, if you create a change, then you gain 2 points, and then if you amend it, then you gain 2 points. And if you merge it, you get 3 points. And these were arbitrary, and it was just sort of an idea of like, oh, if I do something, then this will show up immediately. And then it showed the total of all the points so that not people's individual points, because we didn't want it to be a competition, we wanted it to be a community effort, and then it showed all the people that had contributed below. And if you squint, you can see some familiar faces actually in the crowd. And this is actually what I spent all of GopherCon doing for the most part. So I apologize if I missed anybody who wanted to talk to me, or if I missed your talk, I'm sorry. But this is what I was doing, basically down to the wire, to the point where Steve is actually getting a little bit like, this is like getting down to the wire. And I had to jet to go to my cousin's wedding, and so I actually couldn't be there to see whether or not this worked. And I was pretty sure that it worked, and I was like 90% sure that it worked for my own testing, but I really wasn't sure because we did a couple tests in like the green room while we were waiting for people to speak, but it wasn't really, we didn't do a full-on thing. And I was terrified that, oh, okay, so that one skill that you thought that was the major thing that you could contribute, I was terrified of it not working, and then feeling like, oh, well, that skill that you thought was so valuable was not actually, like you weren't actually that good at that either. And so I remember being at my cousin's wedding and having really crappy reception, and like zero reception and getting on crappy Wi-Fi, and this is all while I was, trying to help out with the actual wedding, just saying, oh, is everything going okay? Is it working? And then I started seeing tweets of it working, and I started to relax a little bit. And I heard about how the dashboard worked and how when it got to 1,000 points, everybody cheered, and that made me feel really nice and warm and fuzzy. But most importantly, I started to feel less uncertain about the value I could bring to the team. So bringing it back to what my purpose was, I started sampling the various challenges the Go team faces. Like we have to deal with extreme growth, we have to scale that with the contribution, we have to scale the contribution and review experience to accommodate for that. We have to engage the community for initiatives like Go2. We have to argue about whether or not we are going to move code review to GitHub. And I discovered all these facets of the project where my own expertise in human-computer interaction, which I have my master's in, and user experience and product could provide a lot of value. And more importantly, the experience led me to reframe and expand my perceived set of skills, or the perceived set of skills that were required to contribute to Go. So when I think of programming languages, I think of this. I think of compilers and garbage collectors and profilers and low-level assembly and all these things that are sort of above what I've dealt with in my career. And compilers and garbage collectors and profilers are an extremely important but very limited part of what contributes to the success of a project like Go. And I'm sure if you ask people on the project, they would say, well, duh, but it's not immediately apparent. If it wasn't immediately apparent to me, then it definitely isn't immediately apparent to other people as well. And not enough people really truly grasp the value that a person with a diverse set of experiences can bring. And I can say this with more sort of affinity because we have a very low number, if even any, external UX designers or copywriters or front-end engineers who are fully engaged in the project. Well, as to counter that, when we launched Go originally, we didn't have a Windows port, and then people just kind of congregated and created this Windows port. And I don't know how much of that was us reaching out to them and saying, hey, we need a Windows port here. You've done some stuff like this in the past, but it was this organic process. And I would say that we're not doing a good enough job of welcoming these types of people to contribute, at least externally. I think I should caveat with the fact that everybody was very, very nice when I joined the team, and they saw my value. But I think we need to do a better job of communicating that outside of, within Google. And I don't know why I love this slide. I got it off of like some Stanford CS 101 course or something like that. And so specialization, when we think about that, is absolutely critical for a project like Go. You need experts on garbage collection and compilers and API design so that we can provide, at least at the base level, a product that will work and be competitive within the market that we're actually competing in. But what tends to be undervalued in very highly specialized communities, however, is the process of acquiring input from people from a wide-ranging set of skills outside of our own bubble of expertise. And so, why do we even want this? What good does it have? What good does it do to have people who don't know anything about programming languages to contribute to a programming language? And the answer is because they see our blind spots, sometimes quite literally. You may have a blind person who is the next Grace Hopper who ends up going to golang.org and they can't read our site because we don't have semantic markup or because we don't have ARIA roles or whatever. I haven't done an accessibility audit of our site, so I don't know. But they could go there and they could find it so difficult, they don't even want to pick up Go. They don't even want to try and use it. And then we've lost a potential contributor there that comes from a very different background than the majority of the team itself. And they enlighten us with novel solutions and they push us to see things from different perspectives. And with that, I'll give you a couple of examples from the analog world. So this guy, his name is Dick Drew. He was a sandpaper salesman for the Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing Company in the 1920s, and he spent a lot of time in auto shops. And so, what he noticed was that in the auto shops in the 1920s, they had the two-tone paint jobs, and what they would do to mask the paint so that they didn't, paint the one color over the other, was that they would put butcher paper with adhesive. With the butcher paper being literal paper that they would use to wrap meat. And then they would paint, and then they would pull off the adhesive, or pull off the paper, and the paint would come off with it. And so it would chip a little bit, and so they'd have to touch it up, and it was really expensive, and it caused all these, what you would call overruns in cost, and it was just a pain in the ass to deal with. And so he saw this, and he realized that if the painters had sandpaper, which had a little bit of adhesive on it, only without the sand part, then this actually could be something that would be a lot more useful because the adhesive on sandpaper was much less strong than what they used in the auto shops at the time. And so he spent about 2 years working on this, and he tested it out with a bunch of different auto shop people and with differing strengths of adhesive and so after 2 years of toiling, he ended up what is now known as masking tape. And so this is an early version of what masking tape actually looked like. And this is an example of what they would do. So they would tape the paper, and then they could paint, and then they could peel it off, and it wouldn't chip. And one time when Drew was testing his masking tape, one of the auto workers exclaimed, with a lot of frustration, "Take this tape back to your Scotch bosses and tell them to put more adhesive on it," because the one that he was testing, I guess, wasn't sticky enough. And the term Scotch at the time was synonymous with stingy or cheap. And later, when he found a similar use case for the company that he worked for, Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing Company, their cellophane wrapping paper, he ended up naming it Scotch tape, which literally means, in the context of when he invented it, cheap tape, which is kind of fun. So by now, I'm sure a lot of you have surmised that this company was 3M, and they do a lot of awesome things in terms of trying to foster innovation, and they invented 15% time way before HP or Google did. We have the 20% time HP. I don't know what percentage HP has. They would encourage, sometimes force people to switch departments, sometimes to the chagrin of the employee. So imagine, literally being like, oh, you do design or whatever it is, mechanical engineering, you're going to move into our adhesives department and see what you can contribute there. And they would do this to encourage cross-pollination of ideas because they understood the importance of differing backgrounds and seeing those blind spots and seeding people with new ideas. So another example, same company. 1968, Spencer Silver, who is on the left, creates another adhesive. I guess they really liked adhesives that had a novel molecular structure where it would stick to things, but it wouldn't adhere to them, which means you could stick it on something, but it wasn't meant to be permanent. But he couldn't find a business use case for it. So he presented it, And he said, oh, I created this thing and it does this, but it didn't really go anywhere from there. Years later, in 1974, Art Fry comes along, the guy on the right, and he was in a church choir. And he kept on getting annoyed because he would open up his choir book, which had his last place, and the piece of paper would fall out. And most people wouldn't think of this as a problem, but he did. And so he went on this quest to find the perfect bookmark. And he thought about the presentation because he attended the presentation that Spencer Silver had given. And he thought, oh, I could use that adhesive because it won't actually damage the paper, and I can move it depending on where I am in the choir or in the song. And so they ended up creating Post-its, which I guess were the original name for them were push and peels. I like Post-it better. So the important part is that Art saw that blind spot that Spencer didn't. And it wasn't for lack of intelligence or specialization on Spencer's part. He was obviously a really intelligent guy. But the product wouldn't exist without the solution and the use case. Because you see this with tech too. You see somebody who creates this thing and it doesn't have a use case. It's like every ex-Googler startup ever. And it's like, here's this amazing technology. And you're like, okay, well, what do you use it for? And it's like, but it's technology. And it's amazing, and it's perfect. And you're like, that's fine, but you don't have product market fit. And they're like, what? Well, that's immaterial. And so you see this actually outside the analog world. And so I want, with these examples in mind, I want you to think about developer products that you believe required a lot of cross-pollination between disciplines. And so for me, the first one that comes to mind is Apple's Instruments product. So who here has done native iOS or Mac development and used Instruments? Okay, so Instruments it has something to do with music. It's a suite of tools used by app developers to examine the performance characteristics of their code, so to instrument it. They have these templates. This is what you see when you open up the app, and you can do different things like you want to try and detect memory leaks, or you want to see what the impact is of a particular piece of code or interaction on the battery. And these templates will come with, or they come prepackaged with these set of instruments that you then can see, oh, okay, the GPS receiver is going off, and so it's taking this much battery. And so it's actually a very, very useful tool for making sure that your apps are performing or are performant, and that they have smooth rendering for graphics, and that they avoid crashes and all these things. And one of the icons that I particularly love is the lower right one, the zombies one. So zombie objects are objects that have been freed, but you may hold a pointer to them, and so you may be sending something to an object that is dead, but you think is alive. So I think this is a fun, cute thing. And this is the old version before they flattened everything, but this is a general idea of what you have. So this is one template where you have your connections, and then your network activity, and your energy usage, and CPU activity, and at the bottom you can kind of see like the actual app activity, and also when you click into certain things, you can drill down to the code that's actually causing the issues that you see. So if you see a spike in CPU, you can drill down and say, okay, I want to see this. But I want you to imagine the amount of communication that was required to build this. Because these are immensely complex tools that are providing technical insights in ways that allow newcomers and experts to examine and troubleshoot performance issues with their applications. So when building a product like this, the specialization required from each collaborator is extremely high. But they were able to find a way to make it work, because you had to have your UX designer, your visual designer, and your engineer consistently having this high amount of communication. And I don't have any insight into how the instruments team collaborates, but I do have suggestions for how we can encourage better communication in cases like this and generally. So by nature of being open source, like I was talking about the Windows stuff before, there's this intrinsic call for contributions from the community familiar with our problem domain. But we need to do better by reaching out to and encouraging those with differing expertise to feel welcome to contribute. This requires laying out a clear path for these people to follow, but for the most part, but the most important staple of all this is communication. So that's going to contribute to the contributor's continued success, is like really, really good communication. And for an example, I have a patch and I say that it improves JSON encoding performance by X amount. And so that's a fairly easy patch to send off and say, okay, this is how I did it. In the commit message, you say, this is how I did it, and here are the benchmarks, and this is what, this is like demonstrating that this actually works. And for a fellow systems programmer, reviewing that change is not particularly difficult because you have this overlap in disciplines that allows you to eschew a lot of the overhead that you would get otherwise. And so I would imagine, unless you're doing something where you're using the unsafe package or whatever, if you were to submit a change like this, and it was not really that controversial, it would probably get merged relatively quickly. And this kind of justification is required for all changes. It's not just this one. But the problem is that as you increase the difference in expertise, that the communication overhead ends up becoming exponentially larger. And so if you're communicating with a copywriter, or if you're communicating with a UX designer, or even a front-end engineer, or to bring it back to the blind person, why these particular things are not accessible, then it increases the time that is required to actually understand the problem and why we should be doing this. And that overhead of bridging the gap in expertise is really high, and too often we're not used to that kind of overhead, so we may be like, oh, this is too much. We may lump it in with people that just kind of put up patches or file issues but don't have anything really constructive to say. And we may dismiss it. And as stewards of the project, we need to be really cognizant and patient in those cases. So in closing, we all have value. Everyone here has value to the Go programming language community and the project itself. And recognizing it can require a lot more work than we're used to. But be open to different perspectives and welcoming of different backgrounds, and unafraid to offer your unique take on things, and most importantly, just be patient with each other during this really messy process. Thanks.